Sue Kangaroo. This is school, and this is Sue, and this is Mummy Kangaroo. The teacher's name is Mrs. Drew. She says hello to Mum and Sue. "This is Sue," says Mrs. Drew. "Do be kind to her, she's new." "Time to paint," says Mrs. Drew. Sue says, "I like red and blue." "Time to glue," says Mrs. Drew. "Sue can glue a kangaroo." "Dinner time," says Mrs. Drew. "This is yummy stew," says Sue. "Music time," says Mrs. Drew. "I can play the spoons," says Sue. Boom, boom, toot, toot. "Home time soon," says Mrs. Drew. "But what is in your pocket, Sue?" Sue takes out a tube of glue. She takes some spoons and paint out too. "The school has rules," said Mrs. Drew. "You can't take those things home with you." Sue is sad. "Don't cry," says Prue. "Play with them tomorrow, Sue." "Is there school tomorrow too?" "Is that true? Hooray!" says Sue. Here is Mummy Kangaroo. "Hi, Mum! School is cool," says Sue. The Cinderella Play. The twins were in a play. It was a play of Cinderella. Mum and Dad came to see it. Gran came too. Fred was the prince. He had to sing a song. Flick was a goose. She had to hiss at the ugly sisters. The ugly sisters were bossy. They made Cinderella do the dusting. Cinderella had an old dress and a duster. But then she got a nice new dress. She got some silver slippers too. Cinderella went to the palace. She danced with the prince. But then she ran away. She dropped a silver slipper. The prince picked it up. Cinderella ran home. Her ugly sisters went home too. Cinderella had her old dress on. The prince had to knock on the door. He had to try the slipper on Cinderella and her sisters. But Fred had lost the slipper. "Have my boot," said Miss Hill. The ugly sisters tried on the boot. It was too loose. But they said, "It's too tight." Cinderella tried on the boot. It was too loose. But she said, "It fits." Mum and Dad liked the play. "It was better than the cinema," said Gran.
Usman's books. My name is Usman. This is my bookshelf. I like reading my books. I wish I could step into a book. If I could step into this book, I would meet a cook. I could put a hat on too. And we would cook a good pudding. If I could step into this book, I would meet Red Riding Hood. I could help her carry her basket. And I could help the woodcutter rescue her. If I could step into this book, I would meet Puss in Boots. I could pull on some boots too. And I would chase mice with him. If I could fly into this book, I would meet a spaceman. I could put on a helmet too. And we would whoosh to the moon in a rocket. If I could run into this book, I would meet a football team. We would play football and I would kick the ball into the goal. And if you could step into this book, you would meet me. The Upside-Down Browns. Mr. and Mrs. Brown read the paper upside down. Mr. and Mrs. Brown have a teapot with 2 spouts. And coffee comes out of their taps. Mr. and Mrs. Brown have a funny round house. It spins round and round like a roundabout. Mr. Brown puts on his trousers to have a shower. He blows his nose on a towel. He puts on his sun hat when it is cloudy. He takes it off when the sun comes out. Mrs. Brown is funny too. She bounces around in a crown. She puts flour on her nose. And she puts powder in the cakes. Mr. and Mrs. Brown go to town in their dressing gowns. They climb mountains in their slippers. They grow flowers in their bed. And they sleep outside in the flower bed. And when Mr. and Mrs. Brown see a clown, they frown. But if you think Mr. and Mrs. Brown are funny, how about their pets?
Bow wow!
Meow.
Leroy. This is my little brother Leroy. When Granny sees Leroy, she says,
What a sweet little boy.
When Grandpa sees Leroy, he says,
What a bundle of joy.
But Granny and Grandpa don't know the real Leroy. The real Leroy is an annoying little boy. Leroy annoys Mum. He jumps on the table. He puts coins down the toilet. And he has a very loud voice. Sweet, sweet, sweet! Leroy annoys my big sister. He fiddles with her little bottles. Leroy annoys the cat. She thinks he is too noisy. Cuddle, cuddle, cuddle! And Leroy annoys me. He scribbles on my books. He muddles up my toys. And pops my bubbles.
Pop, pop.
He spoils all my games. Yes, Leroy is a destroyer. But sometimes, just sometimes, I enjoy having a little brother. I like to tumble about with him. He gives me nice cuddles. And there is one time when Leroy isn't annoying at all. When he's asleep.
No milk today. Mr. and Mrs. Green's cat was hungry. Meow. Stop that noise, said Mr. Green. Meow. She just wants some milk, said Mrs. Green. But the milk jug was empty. I will go and milk the cow, said Mrs. Green. But the cow would not give any milk. Moo! She's hungry too, said Mrs. Green. Mrs. Green went to get some hay for the cow. Moo! But she could not open the shed. She needed a key. Give me the key to the shed, said Mrs. Green to Mr. Green. But Mr. Green said, I can't. I dropped it in the snow. Go and dig the key out of the snow, said Mrs. Green. But Mr. Green said, My feet will freeze. My socks have holes in them. I will mend your socks, said Mrs. Green. But she could not find any wool. I will get some wool from the sheep, said Mrs. Green. But the sheep would not stand still. There were too many mice running around. I will get the cat to chase the mice away, said Mrs. Green. Squeak! So Mrs. Green got the cat. The cat chased the mice. The sheep stood still. Squeak! Mrs. Green got some wool. She mended Mr. Green's socks. Mr. Green dug in the snow. He found the key to the shed. Mrs. Green got the hay. Moo! Mrs. Green fed the cow. The cow gave her some milk. Now I can feed the cat, said Mrs. Green. But the cat was asleep.